The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant is one of Werner Fassbinder's best-known films, and it remains celebrated to this day. Petra von Kant seems to fascinate and excite younger viewers, or at least its reputation does. They might not have a bad time scrolling their phones while it screens in front of them. Listen to me, now I sound like an old bastard, and I'm barely 25. Jesus, imagine when and if I make it to 50. Anyway, enough of that vile nonsense. The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant remains an intriguing object to subsequent generations because it has a certain revolutionary glow. A tradition of classy Western European sexual hedonism is invoked by its set's ominous wallpaper. The bedroom of this apartment, which almost this entire film takes place within, features the presence of an enormous reproduction of Nicolas Poussin's provocative painting Midas and Bacchus, decorating this nest of anguish, an ad hoc asylum treating emptiness. The painting depicts naked men and women, and so I was somewhat nervous about including it in my screenshots for a YouTube upload. But how could I possibly take screenshots and exclude such an utterly iconic set decoration? But yes, aside from invoking a tradition, it behaves as a moving manifesto of authentic expression. Now, ultimately, we are viewing a melodrama, in keeping with the claim that Fassbinder invokes tradition with this film. Although its brazen depictions of sexuality, narcissism, indulgence, and materialism serve more as a vivid sketch of Germany's future, there is a degree to which this film feels as though it forestalls or even forewarns the German or general Western European dilution of any notion of sex as the spiritual. In its depiction of women as prisoners of their compulsive flesh, I have read claims that this film was controversial at one time anyway, amongst feminist critics. Though it is more easy to imagine contemporary younger feminists, and less learned, perhaps, embracing this film for its willingness to depict feminine sexuality, brazen, vulgar, or otherwise. I decided to do some research and reminded myself immediately that, of course, The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant is one of the most academically obsessed over films ever released. No cursory glance betrays much criticism of this film's sexual politics from a sea of critics obsessed with its illustration of gender, all of these writings being, generally speaking, from the 21st century, with a few exceptions. Again, this is from a purely cursory glance from Google's search engine. And amongst this somewhat brief gander of available text, I noticed a claim, I believe unsubstantiated, but nevertheless rather believable, that Fassbinder, in response to those critics who claimed Petra von Kant was mired in cliches of female tragedy and was failing to demonstrate revolutionary enthusiasm, Fassbinder claims that these critics were misguided. Revolution, he is said to have stated in some fashion, belongs outside, to take place in the real world, not within a movie theatre. And that may be so, but with the benefit of hindsight, trying to imagine such a film, The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, existing in 1962 is impossible. The candid conversations of Fassbinder's women paint a mental contemporary counterpart to Poussin's painting. Fassbinder frames this series of emotive reflections with grace, whilst his players purge their spirituality, obsessed with finding solace in the existence of others. In some respects, a nihilistic take on his generation, doomed to sexual melodrama as their forebears had, only now the nihilism is so tolerated that they cannot protest at its frank depiction in artistic media. Why would they? Could they move to condemn the art of Poussin? I'm a fan of the film, if I may be so gratuitous and crude. What I enjoy most is its filmmaking, spellbinding, transformative cinematography, thanks to Michael Ballhaus, highly deliberated framing, exceptional set decoration, and general transcendence of the parameters of physical space. The visual geography of this apartment is purely psychological. A challenging film to discuss, its existence and professions from Fassbinder confuse me as to whether he is acting here as the fundamentalist or as a vanguard. I believe this film's revolutionary status, if any, was not up for him to decide. The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant opened up the doors for newer breeds of art theory to enter and describe the cinema complex. Innovative methods of textual interpretation and analysis have been excitedly employed in film studies in the decades since Fassbinder's passing, and without pictures like Petra von Kant, or something that was at the very least its inexplicable equivalent, this could never have been quite the same landscape we are amongst in this day without that particular film. Amongst Werner Fassbinder's more interesting works, I would say, anyone who claims to have interesting opinions is bound to have something stimulating to suggest about the Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant. Any interesting opinions I hold are purely incidental. I'm just a destitute film junkie. What Petra von Kant looks for amongst the soul of Karen Film, I look for amongst the miraculous availability of much of cinema history. I hate myself, but at least I have the decent sense to line up worthwhile films to watch in order to ensure this life's tolerability. No. If it is possible to view the bitter tears of Petra von Kant and the daunting catalogue of Fassbinder in general, life is at least marginally great.